Summer 1943. Camp Shelby, Mississippi. The first thing Oberleutnant Friedrich Weber noticed about his American captors was the chewing gum. Guards stood at their posts working their jaws rhythmically, an unmilitary habit that would have earned immediate reprimand in the Wehrmacht. They slouched against fence posts, called their sergeants by first names, and complained openly about their rations that included fresh meat, white bread, and coffee with real sugar. To Weber and the 850 German prisoners arriving at Camp Shelby in late June 1943, these Americans represented everything Nazi propaganda had promised. An undisciplined, soft, mongrel army that German military precision would inevitably defeat. Weber had commanded a company through 18 months of North African combat. He had led men across minefields under artillery fire, held positions against British armor with ammunition running low, and maintained unit cohesion through sandstorms and supply failures. His Iron Cross second class had been earned at Tobruk. His promotion to Oberleutnant had come after Kasserine Pass, where his tactical decisions had inflicted significant American casualties before overwhelming force pushed the Afrika Korps back. He knew what military discipline looked like. Men who stood at rigid attention, who marched in perfect formation, who endured hardship without complaint because complaint was weakness. These Americans, by contrast, seemed to regard military discipline as optional. They chewed gum on duty. They sat when they could stand. They addressed officers with casual informality that would have been insubordination in the Wehrmacht. "Look at them," Weber muttered to Feldwebel Klaus Richter as they were processed into the camp. "They don't even know how to stand properly. And that one," he gestured toward a young private leaning against a truck, sleeping on duty. Richter nodded agreement. "Soft. All of them. They have never known real hardship." The other prisoners shared this assessment. These were Afrika Korps veterans, men who had survived conditions that had tested human endurance to its limits. They had fought with inadequate supplies, intermittent food, limited water, and equipment that broke down in desert conditions. They had learned to endure because endurance was survival. Their contempt for American softness was instinctive and immediate. Then the trucks drove them deeper into Camp Shelby, and the contempt began its slow, inexorable transformation into something else entirely. Camp Shelby sprawled across 85,000 acres of Mississippi pine forest, an area larger than many German cities. The scale alone was incomprehensible, but scale was just the beginning. The camp had been constructed in 18 months, beginning in January 1941. When Weber learned this timeline, he initially dismissed it as American exaggeration. No military facility of this magnitude could be built in 18 months. German military construction projects of far smaller scope required years of planning and execution. The barracks, administrative buildings, training facilities, hospitals, and infrastructure required for a major military installation demanded time, precision engineering, and careful resource management. The Americans, it seemed, had simply built it anyway. Official U.S. Army records documented the construction timeline. January 1941, land acquisition and initial clearing began. By May 1941, first barracks were completed. By September 1941, the camp received its first trainees, the 38th Infantry Division. By December 1941, when America entered the war, Camp Shelby housed over 40,000 soldiers. By summer 1943, when Weber arrived as a prisoner, the facility had expanded to accommodate 85,000 personnel with complete infrastructure. The numbers were documented, verifiable, and completely contrary to what Weber understood about military construction capabilities. The camp included 1,750 buildings of various types, complete electrical infrastructure powering every building, hot and cold running water throughout, sewage treatment facilities serving the equivalent of a major city, 3 complete hospitals totaling 1,500 beds, theaters showing current films, libraries with thousands of volumes, chapels for multiple denominations, massive mess halls serving 3 hot meals daily, refrigeration plants producing ice for food preservation and comfort, motor pools with repair facilities, firing ranges and training grounds, administrative offices with telephone communications, and a railroad spur connecting the camp to national rail networks. Weber had served at German military installations that lacked hot water. He had trained at facilities where electricity was intermittent. The Afrika Korps had operated with supply lines so tenuous that ammunition was sometimes prioritized over food. And here, in 18 months, Americans had constructed a city with amenities exceeding German peacetime standards. It must have been built before 1941, Weber insisted to the camp interpreter during processing. They are lying about the construction date to impress us. The interpreter, a German-American from Milwaukee, shrugged. Believe what you want. But I was here in 42 helping translate for Italian POWs. They were still building then. I watched them throw up buildings in weeks that should have taken months. The cognitive dissonance deepened when Weber learned who had built Camp Shelby. Not elite German-style engineers with years of specialized training, but American construction battalions, ordinary workers in uniform, many of whom had been civilian carpenters, electricians, and plumbers before conscription. The undisciplined American military had taken civilian tradesmen, put them in uniform, and built a city in Mississippi forest. The construction workforce had included thousands of civilian contractors alongside military personnel. Unlike German military construction, which relied on army engineers and increasingly on forced labor from occupied territories, American military construction employed a hybrid civilian military model that prioritized speed over military precision. Weber began to pay attention to the guards, particularly the engineering units still working on camp expansions. What he initially perceived as undisciplined chaos revealed itself as something else: practical efficiency unencumbered by rigid hierarchy. He watched a construction crew working on a new administrative building. The sergeant in charge consulted with subordinates, accepting suggestions from a private about load-bearing requirements. When an officer arrived to check progress, the sergeant explained a problem, and the officer, rather than insisting on predetermined plans, authorized an on-site modification that the enlisted men had proposed. In the Wehrmacht, such flexibility would have been impossible. Plans were plans. Hierarchy was absolute. Enlisted men did not propose modifications to officer-approved designs. That these Americans built faster by ignoring proper hierarchy was disturbing to Weber's understanding of how organizations functioned. The guards themselves embodied contradictions. They chewed gum, an unmilitary habit that nonetheless didn't impair their functionality. They complained about food that German soldiers would have considered luxury rations. They maintained casual relationships with superiors that violated every principle of military discipline Weber had learned. Yet they also operated complex equipment with casual competence. A young corporal who couldn't march in proper formation operated a bulldozer with precision, moving earth for drainage systems with efficiency that Weber's technical training allowed him to appreciate. A private who addressed his lieutenant by first name during breaks demonstrated expert knowledge of electrical systems, wiring buildings with speed and accuracy. The softness Weber had mocked was revealing itself as something different, an army that prioritized results over form, that valued practical competence over ceremonial precision, and that built infrastructure at speeds German military engineering couldn't match. The mathematics of construction. Weber had training in military engineering. His pre-war education included technical coursework, and his officer training had covered logistics and infrastructure. He understood construction timelines, resource requirements, and the engineering challenges of large-scale building projects. This knowledge made Camp Shelby's existence more, not less, incomprehensible. He began calculating, using observable data and his engineering knowledge. The barracks alone, 1,750 buildings of various sizes, represented a construction effort that should have required years. Each barracks required foundation work, framing, roofing, electrical installation, plumbing, and finishing. Even with prefabrication, which Americans clearly employed extensively, the coordination required to construct at this scale and speed exceeded German capabilities. The electrical infrastructure was particularly revealing. Every building had electric lighting, climate fans, and power for equipment. This required not just wiring individual buildings but constructing a complete power distribution system, generators, transformers, distribution lines, and backup systems. The technical complexity of electrifying a facility of this scale was substantial. Yet somehow, American construction battalions full of undisciplined soldiers who chewed gum and slouched had completed it in 18 months while simultaneously building dozens of similar facilities nationwide. Camp Shelby wasn't unique. It was one of hundreds of installations constructed during the rapid American military expansion. Weber obtained access to camp newspapers and military publications through the prisoner library. Articles documented American military construction statistics. By 1943, the U.S. had constructed over 240 major military installations. Total military construction spending exceeded $12 billion. Construction employed over 1.5 million workers at peak. Standardized prefabrication enabled rapid building deployment. Average construction time for major bases, 12 to 18 months. Germany's entire military construction capacity, when Weber calculated comparisons, was being exceeded by American efforts by orders of magnitude. The Third Reich, which had spent the 1930s rebuilding its military, couldn't construct facilities at speeds Americans achieved in their rapid 1941 to 1943 expansion. The water that ran hot. Small details accumulated into larger understanding. Weber's barracks as a prisoner had hot and cold running water. Showers were available daily. Toilets flushed reliably. These amenities, unremarkable to Americans, were luxuries that many German military installations lacked. The hot water particularly struck Weber. Heating water for 85,000 people required substantial fuel and infrastructure. The boiler systems, piping, and maintenance represented resource allocation that Germany directed elsewhere. American military planning apparently considered hot showers for soldiers a standard requirement, not an unaffordable luxury. The German approach to military construction prioritized function over comfort. Soldiers were expected to endure hardship. Amenities were weakness. The Spartan conditions of German barracks were considered character building, preparing men for combat's harsh realities. Yet here were Americans, provided with hot showers, heated barracks, and comfortable facilities, and they were winning the war. The correlation between hardship and military effectiveness that Weber had always assumed was being contradicted by observable reality. One evening, listening to guards complain about the mess hall food, complaints about food that included fresh meat, vegetables, bread, and dessert, Weber experienced a moment of clarity. These Americans complained because their standards were so high that meals German soldiers would celebrate seemed ordinary to them. Their softness wasn't weakness but abundance so vast they could take comfort for granted. The hospital complex. Camp Shelby's medical facilities provided another measurement of American military philosophy. The three hospital complexes totaling 1,500 beds represented medical capacity exceeding many German cities. Full surgical facilities, X-ray equipment, dental clinics, pharmacies with abundant supplies, and specialized treatment wards demonstrated resource allocation to soldier welfare that Wehrmacht medical services couldn't approach. Weber had witnessed German military medicine in North Africa. Overcrowded field hospitals with inadequate supplies, surgeons operating by lamplight with limited anesthesia, wounded men evacuated to overwhelmed facilities in Tunisia and Italy, dental problems ignored because dentistry was considered non-essential. The contrast with American medical infrastructure was stark. When a German prisoner required appendix surgery, he was treated at Camp Shelby's hospital with the same standard of care provided to American soldiers. The surgery was successful, performed in a well-equipped operating theater by trained surgeons with abundant supplies. Recovery occurred in a clean hospital ward with nursing care, proper nutrition, and medical monitoring. The prisoners survived because Americans allocated resources to medical infrastructure even for enemies. This wasn't battlefield necessity, this was systemic philosophy about the value of preserving human health and life. The transformation. Weber's transformation didn't occur in a single moment but through accumulating observations that couldn't be reconciled with his existing worldview. Each detail contradicted what he believed about the relationship between discipline and effectiveness, hardship and strength, military precision and practical results. The critical moment came in October 1943, when Weber was assigned to a work detail assisting with construction of additional prisoner facilities. He worked alongside American engineering units and observed their methods directly. The American approach to construction problems was collaborative and pragmatic. When challenges arose, soldiers at various ranks discussed solutions. Expertise mattered more than rank in technical decisions. A specialist with relevant knowledge might override a sergeant's initial plan if he could demonstrate a better approach. The hierarchy still existed, but it flexed to accommodate practical problem-solving. Weber watched an incident that crystallized his changing understanding. A foundation excavation revealed unexpected clay subsoil that would compromise drainage. The sergeant in charge consulted with his crew, including a private who had civilian experience in similar soil conditions. They discussed options, modified plans on site without waiting for officer approval, and implemented a solution that addressed the problem immediately. In the Wehrmacht, this situation would have required stopping work, reporting up the chain of command, waiting for engineering officers to analyze the problem, receiving revised orders, and then implementing changes, a process requiring days or weeks. The Americans simply fixed it and continued working. The result: American construction proceeded faster not despite but because of flexibility that German military discipline would have considered inappropriate. Weber realized he had confused rigidity with discipline, endurance of unnecessary hardship with strength, and ceremonial precision with effectiveness. German military culture celebrated hardship and demanded rigid hierarchy, not because these produced superior results but because Germany lacked the resources for comfort and flexibility. Hardness was ideology masking scarcity. American softness, the chewing gum, the casual relationships, the complaints about good food, the hot showers and comfortable barracks, was what abundance looked like. Americans could afford comfort and still maintain military effectiveness. They could allow flexibility because their systems were robust enough to accommodate it. They could build faster because they prioritized results over procedure. The broader picture: as Weber's access to information increased through camp libraries and newspapers, he understood that Camp Shelby wasn't exceptional. It represented standard American military construction. Similar facilities existed across the United States, each built with similar speed and similar amenities. The Americans were simultaneously fighting in North Africa, Italy, and the Pacific while conducting massive bombing campaigns over Europe and maintaining Atlantic convoy systems, and still allocating resources to ensure military trainees had hot showers, libraries, and ice for their drinks. Germany was fighting desperately on multiple fronts with inadequate supplies, and still couldn't provide basic amenities at military installations in the homeland. The Wehrmacht's hardness wasn't ideological superiority but resource poverty dressed up as virtue. Weber began to grasp the scale of American industrial capacity. The base that shouldn't exist, built in 18 months by undisciplined soldiers, was a small demonstration of capabilities that Germany simply couldn't match. The chewing gum casualness that he'd initially mocked masked an organizational and industrial capacity that rendered German military precision irrelevant through sheer overwhelming abundance. Post-war reflections. After repatriation in 1946, Weber returned to a destroyed Germany where infrastructure that had taken decades to build lay in ruins. He found work with reconstruction efforts, eventually becoming involved in planning for the new Bundeswehr in the 1950s. In a 1968 interview with military historian Judith Gansberg, Weber reflected on his POW experience. "I arrived at Camp Shelby convinced that American soldiers were undisciplined and soft. I left understanding that they had built in 18 months what we couldn't build in years, while fighting a war on multiple continents. That wasn't softness. That was power on a scale we had never understood. We mistook our hardship for virtue and their abundance for weakness. It was the opposite." Weber advocated for the Bundeswehr to adopt certain American military practices: flexibility in problem-solving, valuing expertise over rigid hierarchy in technical matters, and investing in soldier welfare as force multiplier rather than wasteful luxury. The new German military, prohibited from aggressive militarism and rebuilt with American assistance, incorporated some of these lessons. Other former POWs who experienced similar revelations contributed to post-war German reconstruction with understanding that infrastructure investment, abundant resources, and practical efficiency could outperform ideological rigidity and enforced hardship. The economic miracle of 1950s Germany was built partly on lessons learned by men who had witnessed what American abundance could accomplish. Critical assessment. The narrative of American efficiency and German rigidity requires important qualifications. The American military in 1943 had significant problems that this account must acknowledge. Racial segregation. Camp Shelby trained both white and black units, but in completely segregated facilities. African American soldiers built infrastructure and trained for combat while being denied the basic dignity of equal treatment. The same soft American military that built impressive bases also enforced brutal racial hierarchies. German POWs often received better treatment than black American soldiers. Regional variations. Camp Shelby represented American military construction at its most successful, but other facilities had problems. Cost overruns, construction delays, contractor corruption, and quality issues plagued some projects. Not every installation matched Shelby's standard. Labor exploitation. The rapid construction relied partly on exploited labor, underpaid civilian contractors, workers in dangerous conditions, and displaced local populations. The speed came with human costs that official narratives ignored. Military discipline. American military discipline, while different from German models, included its own brutality. Court-martial rates, punishment protocols, and treatment of deserters revealed that American casualness had hard limits. The flexibility Weber observed existed within bounds of military justice that could be severe. Industrial advantages. American construction capabilities relied on geographical advantages Germany lacked. No bombs fell on American factories. Resources flowed from unattacked supply lines. Distance from combat enabled infrastructure development impossible in war zones. American abundance reflected geography and oceanic protection as much as systemic superiority. Nevertheless, Weber's core observation held validity. The American military had built extraordinary infrastructure at extraordinary speed while fighting a global war, and the organizational approach that enabled this differed fundamentally from German military culture in ways that produced practical results. Conclusion. The story of Oberleutnant Friedrich Weber and Camp Shelby represents one thread in the larger tapestry of German POW experiences in America. The transformation from mockery to understanding occurred across thousands of individual prisoners through accumulated observations that contradicted Nazi propaganda and pre-war assumptions. Camp Shelby still exists today as a major National Guard training facility. The buildings that Weber found impossible in 1943 have been replaced by newer construction, but the base that shouldn't exist continues operating, training American soldiers in Mississippi pine forest. The broader lesson transcends individual transformation. Material conditions shape ideology more effectively than propaganda. German prisoners encountered an American military that violated every principle they'd been taught about discipline, hierarchy, and hardship, and it functioned more effectively than their own. This contradiction couldn't be explained away or ignored. It had to be integrated into understanding, and integration required ideological revision. The guards who chewed gum while operating equipment Germany couldn't manufacture, who complained about food German soldiers would treasure, who built in months what German engineering required years to accomplish, demonstrated that softness and effectiveness weren't incompatible. Comfort and capability could coexist. Abundance enabled rather than undermined military function. Weber's journey from contempt to comprehension mirrored that of thousands of German POWs who arrived in America expecting weakness and discovered power of a type they hadn't understood existed. The revelation wasn't simply that America was wealthy, but that wealth could be organized and deployed with casual efficiency that made German military precision seem elaborate compensation for scarcity. The chewing gum, in the end, didn't signify undisciplined weakness. It signified an army so confident in its capabilities, so abundant in its resources, and so effective in its organization that it could afford casualness without sacrificing functionality. That was the lesson of Camp Shelby. What Weber had interpreted as American softness was actually strength of a magnitude that German hardness could never match.